Hi, I'm Ruth Molman from the Farmington Hills Historic District Commission, and we're here today in the newly renovated library. Farmington has always had a fairly educated group in this community, starting with the early settlers who came from New York, following Thomas Jefferson's feeling that an educated society was necessary in order to have a democracy. It came down through the various organizations, the Ladies Literary Society, going on to the AAUW, and finally to the Historical Society, which took a interest in the community. And here in the library, our new library, we have a history room, which is taking the collection from the Historical Society. Our Historical Society started with Val Lorien, who was a newcomer to Farmington, living in the Lawrence Simmons house on 12 Mile Road. She was fascinated with the architecture, which was done by Sturgis P. Lyons, and so she just started the whole ball rolling towards what eventually became our Historical Society. In this history room that we have here is a lot of the works of Lee Peel. He joined the early Historical Society, and then he got his advanced students at Farmington High School to research some of the houses, and also had them do these fascinating drawings that we have on the wall of our history room. And they were done in 1974, which these students who did the drawings and who did the research on many of the houses that we have now in our district in Farmington Hills were students at the time, advanced students in Mr. Peel's courses in journalism. Let me mention some of the people that were also contributed to this collection, which became our heritage, which became the basis of our heritage room. We can thank Kay Briggs, and we can thank Bob Cook, who was a genealogist and had a fantastic collection, which is really the basis for much of the things that we have here in the history room. They started out as just two cases in the library, the original library on Farmington Road, and they went from there to this wonderful history room we have now. And the collection, of course, of Bob Cook is the very backbone of this, plus the research that Lee Peel did in collecting the original papers. We will now go in and talk with Bev Papey on the history of our library that we have here in Farmington. Bev has done a lot of work on this, and we're going to go from when the libraries were in the schools in the 1880s, right down to this magnificent new reconstruction that we have on the building here in Farmington Hills. Bev, will you tell us something that you know about the history of the library? I see you have quite a listing
Ruth, there's
here.
so much. We're sitting in the middle of our new heritage room at the main library on 12 Mile, and there's a wealth of information that's in this room relative to Farmington history. But you know, there have only been 6 library directors in our history. So when I became the library director, I was given this notebook that's filled with the history of the Friends of the Library and the library itself, and I've had a chance to look through it a bit. You're absolutely right. Our history goes back to early education and teachers, and probably just as important in terms of libraries throughout the state, the 1835 Constitution identified public libraries as being important. And it allocated all of the fines, the penal fine money, from infractions of township, village, city laws towards the funding of public libraries in the state. So, back in 1835, we thought public libraries were important to our state.
That's before we became a state.
Well, that was our very first constitution. In our community, the first mention of public libraries in these primary documents that we have of library service was it was reorganized in 1880. So that meant that teachers had pooled together their personal books and loaned them to adults in the Farmington area. And when it was reorganized, public library service was available every other Saturday from 3 p.m. until 8 p.m. One adult could check out one book for a period of 2 weeks, and if the books were overdue, then if the book was overdue, it was 5 cents a week in fines.
That was big money.
Oh, big money then. The next mention that we have of libraries in our community was really in 1908. And in 1908, there was a state law that passed for the establishment of one public library in every township. Now, it provided for it to be established, it didn't fund it. So Martha Schroeder and Andrew Crosby were teachers in our area at the time, and they had been responsible for the library service. And they went to the township trustees and said, you're responsible for funding a public library. And as a result, it took a couple of years to convince the township trustees that this was a worthy thing of doing. But in 1913, there was $2.11 collected in penal fines for our area. Now, a lot of things happened around that time. The teachers said that they couldn't be teachers and be librarians too, and that we needed to once again reorganize library service within the community. So the township trustees turned the whole issue back to Martha Schroeder because she was also active in the Ladies Literary Club. And the Ladies Literary Club took on the responsibility of supporting library services. And they, among the other things they did, they rented out the Sunday school room of the First Baptist Church on Farmington Road in Shiawassee.
It's amazing that they picked that one because the Reverend, what's his name now? Reverend Roscoe had a school there, an academy that had run, and it was like a university, except they didn't give any credits. So the Baptist Church was very comfortable with this kind of thing.
With
apparently.
offering things to the community then.
Yes, of an intellectual variety. And another lady that was there was Florence Moore. She had gone to the school, and she was married to the, there's a romance story there.
Yes.
She
Romance
was,
in the stacks, I love it.
Well, she was kind of a feisty lady, and this Dr. Moore came in to help with an epidemic we had apparently in Farmington. And he met Florence and never left.
Oh, I love it.
And he was a first-rate doctor.
Well, Florence and Martha were pretty shrewd because from the township trustees, they got $600 allocated. First time there's ever been tax money, local tax money allocated for library service. And that $600 was to be divided between the cemetery and the library.
Wow.
But the cemetery had priority.
Lovely.
So that first year, the ladies decided that they needed some steady flow of revenues. And the whole concept of a public library being free had certainly been discussed in other places like Philadelphia, but many, many communities had literary societies with paid subscriptions. So our paid subscription was 25 cents a year for adults to use the library, run by the Ladies Literary Society. And that first year, they moved a collection of 800 volumes into the First Baptist Church. The rent was $12 a year. They bought 100 new volumes of books for $41.38. And at the end of their first year of operation, they had a grand total of $14.80 unspent, including that first $2.11 in penal fines.
$41 now, maybe if you were lucky, would buy 2 books.
Now, you know, we didn't have paid librarians in those days.
We didn't.
No, we didn't. Everything had been handled by volunteer to that point. And they encouraged another member of the Ladies Literary Club, Mary Kennedy, to take on temporarily the responsibilities for library service. And she held this temporary position for the next 25 years. And ultimately, a few years down the road, she was paid a little bit of money in funds as the head librarian. But we always considered little Mary Kennedy our first head of the library.
Well, they talked about her in such strange terms. I mean, she had been a classmate of Clint Wilbur, as I understand,
Yes.
whose aunt was involved with this literary
Minnie Wilbur.
society. Yeah. And you said they referred to her very strangely.
Well, she evidently was very petite in stature, and hence she was always called Little Mary Kennedy. But sometimes in the newspaper articles of the day, you'll hear them refer to Little Crippled Mary Kennedy. So I'm not sure exactly what her malady was, but she had some condition that rendered her difficulty walking. And to my knowledge, I don't believe she ever married. But she held the position of librarian for 25 years and really became the spokesman in the community for improved library service.
It was she lived in 1938.
She did. So from 1913 to 1938, she was considered the head of the library. And there was a great number of things that happened in that time. It quickly became apparent that the Sunday school room was not going to be sufficient to house the public library. And so it was decided in 1915 that there would be an addition to the town hall and that the library would move into that addition. Well, World War II came along, or excuse me, World War I came along, and that addition was delayed because there were strictures put on buildings. And the library temporarily moved to the basement of the town bank until 1919, and that addition to the town hall was completed and the library moved in there.
You know, the bank, they would have had ladies that belonged to the Literary Society.
Right.
Mrs. Warner would have been an active member.
Right.
She was, I was sure she had a lot of influence.
I think the library became a cause célèbre for the women leaders in our community. And if you go back and look at some of the names involved in the literary club, you'll see that very thing.
Oh, they were very fancy when they met. I remember Bob Cook told me that when he was a little boy, his mother had the meeting at her house, and she had the porter from the store come all dressed up and receive the ladies and help them park and everything. It was quite fancy.
Now that would be Anna Cook.
Yes.
Yes, her name is very apparent too, and as we proceed, you'll probably see why. So little Mary Kennedy died in 1938. She died April 12th, 1938. And the library had to undergo a reorganization. It's second or third or fourth reorganization. And it was decided that the township and the city of Farmington would contribute equally to library services. And in 1938, in the state, there was another movement afoot to bring state aid to public libraries. And so for the first time, public libraries all over the state of Michigan had the opportunity to get state funding to support it. But they're, you know, as they dangle the carrot, they give you the requirements for fulfilling your eligibility for state aid. And those requirements haven't really changed since 1938. A community had to dedicate 3/10 mil in local funding for public library services. They had to be open X number of hours per week, and they had to have a paid librarian.
Well, you know, in 1926, when the city of Farmington was established, there was a big problem for the library, and Wendell Brown, one of our local attorneys, went to bat for them and got a special law from the legislature so that the city and the township could combine to have a library.
Wendell Brown is quite influential in our history, and there was a little bit of controversy about library services then.
Really?
The library is mired in controversy. We talked earlier about Minnie Wilbur. Well, her nephew was Clinton Wilbur, who also was a friend of little Mary Kennedy. And when Clinton Wilbur died, I believe it was in 1950, he left his estate to the trustees, the city trustees, to fund either a hospital or a public library. Well, there wasn't sufficient money to adequately fund a hospital, and there still was lots of discussion that needed to go on about how to fund a city. So there were two problems. One was that the money was potentially available, but it was being held by our city fathers. And the second problem was how would a city and a township legally operate a library? So enter Wendell Brown. And he went to the state legislature and asked for a district library law and got it. We were the first district library in the state. And it's now a form of reorganization that many, many, many public libraries across the state use.
Well, the hospital was a real thing because, you know, they did the operations right in the doctor's offices, and babies were delivered very often on the kitchen table.
Well, they couldn't convince the township officials, or excuse me, the city of Farmington officials that they needed to do a hospital. Mm-hmm. So instead, they just held on the money. And then what happened is that Farmington changed from a city commission to a city council, and then there was discussion about could they be bound by decisions made by a city commission. So they're sitting with this money. And the library board of trustees, working with Mr. Brown, ultimately went to a circuit court and had a judicial construction handed down that said that that $75,700 from the Wilbur estate should be turned over to the Library Board of Trustees for the construction or establishment of a public library.
Well, they talked about having the library in his home. I guess he gave them the home too,
Mm-hmm.
right
Mm-hmm.
there on Grand River, and
Yeah.
they didn't think it was too good a spot, I guess.
It sold. However, in the meantime, there's another angel that comes into our midst, and that is Ruth Carlisle. And Ruth Carlisle had been a teacher in Detroit and a Farmington resident, and she bequeathed to the library $12,133 from her estate. So these two sums of money allowed the library board to purchase the old post office on Farmington Road. And in 1955, a new post office was proposed. The library trustees looked at the old post office, which is now, I believe, Castle Dental. It's right next to the National Bank of Detroit, or excuse me, Bank One now, on Farmington Road. It's just north of there. And that was our first library in its own building, the old post office.
I remember the history room. It was two cases of things that the Historical Society had collected.
And, you know, it's amazing to me that through all of our years and all of our many changes and all of the new or the renovated buildings we've had, that the history collection has remained important.
Yes, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
They lost a lot of artifacts. They stored them over in the winery, and they got mildew.
Oh, and you know, every time you
just-
deal with old materials, truly you know about mildew and the need for preservation. That post office building was 3,800 square feet, and it had 18,000 books. And in 1938, when we reorganized, a woman named Florence Leach was the library director. Florence Leach actually died in 1959, and her assistant, who was a trained librarian named Mildred Draghi, took her place as the head librarian. And Mildred Drakey is a name that probably many residents in our community will remember if they lived here as young children, because she loved to tell stories to children.
Oh, how nice.
So she was quite the storyteller in this new little post office building. And worked with the Historical Society at that time. And she was the librarian until 1971, when the trustees were just about ready to open the main library on 12 Mile. And at that time, a woman named Mary Mitchell was hired. She'd been a longtime employee of Detroit Public Library, and her background was in personnel, and she was hired to be the library director. And that building was revolutionary for its time. It was inconceivable to the trustees that they would need to expand as we've just finished doing.
It's a shame, because the land was so much cheaper then.
Oh, it was. I mean, considerably cheaper, and we owned 5 acres of that land. And when we got ready, just to give you an idea, I think we paid $25,000 for that 5 acres, or $5,000 an acre in the late 1960s. When we got ready to add on to that main library on 12 Mile, the city of Farmington Hills purchased 2.5 acres for us and held it until such time as a millage passed that would allow bonding for a new main library. And we ended up paying, I think, $657,000 for that 2.5 acres.
Wow.
I think people have enjoyed this location on 12 Mile Road. They became used to using the library here, and it's very difficult to convince people that the right thing to do is abandon a building and build new.
Yeah, well, I remember being at one of the meetings of one of the organizations, and you hadn't been able to open on time, and they were irate. They wanted that library so badly.
Ruth, our library is used. You know, when we talk about old library service and only having a few hundred or a few thousand volumes, we now have just under 200,000 volumes in this building. And our library circulation last year, even under construction, was 1.2 million. And I think very shortly this building alone will do 1.1 million. So we'll see the Farmington branch continue to be used. It's really in a lovely area. It's adjacent to City Hall, and that building was completed in 1975. This building was completed in 1972, and then our construction has just finished.
Well, they just love walking to the downtown library.
Yes.
That is very nice for people.
Yes.
And they can, even if they don't park right there, they can walk the other.
Right. Half of the circulation in the Farmington branch is from young children out of our children's department, whereas probably 65% of the circulation of the main library is out of the adult department.
Now, you did something very nice in the children's department for this opening. I wonder if we can get a picture of those dinosaurs you brought in.
Well, that's a temporary exhibit, and I would love to show you our dinosaurs. I have a full-size T-Rex head and a half-size Triceratops head and body. And the children can touch them. They're a soft rubber, so they feel interesting. We also have a dino dig box, and that's for little budding paleontologists to use little brushes and brush the sand away from fossilized remains.
Oh my.
And then we have a dino rub station, so that we have bas-reliefs of various dinosaurs, and children can use paper and crayons to create rubbings, much like historians create rubbings of cemetery headstones.
You know, we don't want them to do too many rubbings. They'll rub whatever's left off. But well, I guess you're going to have to be innovative then and keep these kids coming back for something else when your dinosaurs leave.
Well, I had the opportunity the other day to see a mother walking out with 2 young children, both of whom were crying because they had to leave the library. That's just exactly what we want.
Oh, I remember when I was here for your opening, and the one father said to the children, "Those are big enough to eat you."
The dinosaurs,
yes. I wonder if they ever chase people.
Well, not in this building. They're protected here. But it's a great photo opportunity for parents to bring in their cameras, and we allow children to sit on the back of the Triceratops, so there's a great photo opportunity for young children and a dinosaur.
Oh my. And do you have plans for additional things? I know you support business here considerably.
Well, we have many, many plans of things that we want to proceed with. You may know that we have a computer training center in this building, and we have 21 PCs and an instructor station in that computer training lab. So we're offering to the community training on information resources. And we have a small lab at our Farmington branch with only 9 people for PCs. So we want to continue adding classes as the community interest indicate. We also have a foundation center collection in this building, one of 150 in the country. So we can help people obtain grants, find information about funding sources. There are still things that we need to do to the history room. Ultimately, I would like to have many of the items, including information like this primary resource material, digitized so that people can not damage our original documents, but have access to it both in the library and from their home. And I just have to show you the headlines. This is the Farmington Enterprise from 1961, July 1961. And it has to do with our moving in to the post office library, and the headlines are, "Struggle for adequate library here, long and trying." And it talks about the Friends of the Library. The Friends of the Library in 1961 were about 255 members. They're now over 1,500 members of the Friends of the Library. And the Friends still support really special things in the library services. In this building, they supported some of the pieces of artwork that we have available. And so we've had a long, long travail to reach this point in our community where I think we're offering really good library services to our residents.
Yes, they have a lot of college graduates now. You just almost have to be.
You know, I think statistically, it's 43% of adults over the age 21 in our community have graduated from college with at least 1 degree, and many have 2 degrees.
Yeah, well, the Ladies Literary Society were very, very literary, and they didn't have very much formal training, so we've come a very interesting path of specialization here.
We have. We certainly have, and our community has changed, and their demands for library services have increased.
Well, thank you so much for this march through Farmington history and through the history of our intellectual development. I think it goes right along with the library development. And thank you so much for letting us come and photograph the library and all the things that have happened for Farmington.
Ruth, you can come back anytime.
Well, I do quite often. Good. Thank you.